Welcome to Capitol Hill. The government today is dealing with the aftermath of another riot in a detention centre, this time at the centre in Villawood in Sydney. The minister's talking tough, but the opposition wants him to be even tougher. Tony Abbott's one up the government, announcing a mental health policy ahead of an expected announcement in the budget. But where's the money coming from for his policy? The government's found a bit more money, increasing the efficiency dividend. For another 2 years, the public service will get a bit of an extra haircut. To discuss these issues, I've been joined in Sydney by Labor MP Stephen Jones and in Melbourne by Liberal MP Dan Tehan. Welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Lyndall. Good afternoon, Dan.
Dan Tehan, the opposition, your side of politics, is calling for the government to be even tougher in responding to the riot in Villawood. But given that the minister says many of those involved in the riot are at the end of the process, that they've had their visas refused once or twice, isn't there a limit to what the government can actually do?
Well, the government has to get its act together. The problem is their policy. Their policy is leading to more boat arrivals, it's putting pressure on the detention centres, and it's leading to rioting. If they got their policy right, and we've articulated quite clearly what they should do, we wouldn't see the mess that we have. They also have to get serious and decide whether East Timor is the solution or not. I know Julia Gillard is now in the region travelling overseas, but I don't see the East Timor solution on her agenda to be discussed with regional leaders. Their policy is a mess, and that's the problem. And reviews and the minister trying to talk tough when really all he's doing is slapping a wet lettuce leaf at these issues, it's just not going to work.
Stephen Jones, is there more the government could be doing, the minister could be doing, to send a message to asylum seekers that this behaviour is not on?
I think the minister, in condemning the behaviour of this minority of people in Villawood, has spoken on behalf of all Australians. They stand to be condemned, and they will face the full force of the law if they are found to have acted criminally.
Dan Tehan, asylum seekers, when they're coming to this country, are not committing any illegal acts. Under the Refugee Convention, they're allowed to seek asylum. Don't you risk being seen as being too tough by the approach that the opposition has taken over a number of years?
Well, offshore processing was proved to work under the Howard government. Why the Labor government changed that is beyond me. They need to go back to that policy, to go back to offshore processing and fix this problem, and that will reduce the number of asylum seekers. We saw that that happened under the Howard government's policy. And why they won't just admit they got it wrong, that they've created a mess which is leading to criminal acts occurring at both Villawood and at Christmas Island. The whole thing is just a mess. The minister needs to admit it's a mess. He needs to go back to the previous policy that the Howard government had in place that was working, and I, for the life of me, cannot understand why they can't just make that simple decision.
But would it not be better, you've proposed sending asylum seekers to Nauru, would it not be better if Nauru was a signatory to the Refugee Convention before that happened?
Well, I mean, the point is that Nauru have said that they'll take them. I think the government could discuss the signatory issue with them. But, you know, the government has suggested East Timor and done nothing about it. When is the government going to get East Timor up and running? As far as I can tell, that will never happen. It's just a hoax on the Australian people. They aren't serious about fixing this issue. We showed them when the Howard government was in office how it should be done, but they will not admit that they have a problem.
Stephen, does the government need to begin to look wider at sites for a regional processing centre than East Timor?
Linda, let's deal with the facts here and take some of the overblown rhetoric that Dan's been running off at the mouth with out of it. We've got 45 million displaced people around the globe. In Australia, we accept around about 10,000 refugees each year, and that's been the case for over 15 years now. So what we need to do, if we are going to, as a part of the international community, deal with these 45 million displaced persons in a humane way is we need a regional solution. That means working with our near neighbours like Indonesia, and that's why Kevin Rudd was in Indonesia a few weeks ago, reaching agreement with the Indonesian government to ensure that we crack down on the people smugglers at source, and why the Minister Chris Bowen has been working in East Timor and elsewhere to ensure that we can get a regional solution for processing in a humane way the people who are displaced in our region. Overblown rhetoric isn't going to resolve it. There have been riots in detention centres in the past. Hopefully there are no more in the future. It was a feature under John Howard's policy and John Howard's government. So simply to say that this is a new thing is untrue. It's a tragedy. It's misplaced. It will not affect our decision making one iota, and what it does is serve to put the cause of those who advocate for a more humane treatment of refugees in the region. It puts that cause back many, many years.
If I could move on to the issue of mental health, Dan, your leader has announced a $400 million mental health policy today, but he's not said how that would be funded. This comes on top of his welfare policy, which had no numbers attached to it at all. At the time when you're calling on the government to rein in spending, should you be more judicious in saying where you'd get the money from to fund the policies you're announcing?
Well, Lyndall, we're in opposition. We'll have the government handing the budget down in May, and I'm sure then we will be able to outline where the money will come from. But we went to the last election with a $1.5 billion commitment in this area. We've put an additional $450 million on the table today. This is a very good policy, and I call on the government to match it in this year's budget, and not only match it so that where spending will occur in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, but to match it with spending which will start dealing with this issue right away. We've had the former government advisor on mental health who resigned last year in disgust with what the government's approach has been. He said that we need spending and spending straight away, and I'm hoping in this budget we'll see the government not outline some future plans in 5 or 10 years, but deal with this issue right here and now.
Stephen, the Prime Minister has said that mental health will be a second-term priority. Do you believe that there will be spending, there will be money in the budget on this area?
Absolutely. Look, it is going to be a tough budget, Lyndall, but the Prime Minister has said a second-term priority. And here's what we agree with the opposition on, that we've got a terrible problem with mental health in this country. It was unfinished business after 11 years of coalition government. And we are committed to dealing with it, and dealing with it in a thoroughgoing way, which is why we've appointed a minister in the form of Mark Butler, who's got a special responsibility for bringing proposals before Cabinet in the near future. It will be a feature of our budget. But I tell you what you've got to do if you want to fund, as Dan says, mental health services into the future, and that is you've got to be able to add up. And what we know about the Coalition's policy is that they had an $11 billion black hole in their budget figuring, and the only basis on which they were able to put their mental health package forward was by cutting the guts out of primary health care, knocking off super clinics, pulling money out of hospitals and robbing Peter to pay Paul. We say that's no way to address the mental health problem in this country. It needs new money, but it also needs the right policies, and I think just watch this space.
Stephen, if
I could just add there, we've had an $85 billion stimulus package that the Rudd government introduced and the Gillard government continued with, and they couldn't find in that $85 billion stimulus package money for mental health. I hope they find some money in this coming budget, otherwise it will be an utter disgrace.
Stephen, the government has managed...
An $85 million stimulus package, Dan, which has worked. We've got the lowest unemployment rate of any OECD country, and there's not a treasurer in the world who wouldn't want to be in Wayne Swan's shoes as he hands down this budget in May.
Stephen, the government has managed to find some money today, increasing the efficiency dividend for the next 2 financial years by 0.25% in each of those years. In a former life, when you were National Secretary of the CPSU, you called the efficiency dividend a blunt, one-size-fits-all instrument that's not useful in building a dynamic, creative public service. Do you still believe that's the case, or is there now you're in government, do you see a need to give the public service an extra haircut?
I still believe the efficiency dividend, Lyndall, is a blunt instrument, but what we know as we walk into what is going to be a very tough budget, the savings have to be found. The 0.25% additional efficiency dividend, which adds to the 1.25% efficiency dividend, will find some savings. There'll be some areas of the public service which will struggle to meet that, but I'm confident that with the additional flexibility that has been introduced as a part of the review of the efficiency dividend, which enables savings to be found across a portfolio level and not restrained to a single department, and that made it very difficult for a number of those small departments to find the savings. I think that it can be achieved, but I think over the long term we need to have a sensible debate about how we fund our public services for the public good for the long term. But as the Finance Minister has said today and the Treasurer has said today, we've got a tough budget. There are going to be sacrifices made everywhere, and people expect the government to be looking in its own backyard as well.
Dan Tehan, the Howard government used efficiency dividends as well, so is this a savings measure that you can support?
Well, we've heard Stephen say tough budget, I think about 5 or 6 times. We've heard the Treasurer over the last couple of months use the word tough budget hundreds, if not thousands of times. Yet if this is what they're calling a tough budget, this measure, this government has a long, long way to go.
But the government hasn't even handed down its budget, and it's already announcing savings of $1.1 billion over the forward estimates.
Well, it is, but we're going to need a lot more than that. We've got very strong terms of trade, and the Treasurer still can't get the budget back into surplus. And he's talking tough, and he's mentioning tough budget, tough budget, tough budget. Yet these measures aren't tough. We went to the last election with tougher measures on this, and the government has really adopted a lighter version of that. If they were serious, they could look at our policy of a 2-year freeze on recruitment. That would get them real savings. And there are a lot of other measures that they could look at as well. They're talking tough, but what we're seeing with policies like this is when push comes to shove, we're not going to see any toughness at all.
Stephen Jones,
Lyndall, I find that interesting coming from a bloke who stood up in Parliament a few weeks ago during his appropriation speech and said he wanted the government to be spending more money. Now, what Dan knows and what I know is that we have to manage the return to surplus in a responsible way, and if we start pulling too much money out of the economy too quickly, we'll be taking to the economies of regional Australia, regions that he represents and that I represent, with the back of an axe. So we need a gradual withdrawal of that stimulus money. We need to ensure that as we move into strong growth in a patchwork economy, that we bring regional Australia along with us. So, Dan, if you want to go to your constituents and tell them that we should be sacking more government workers, which are some of the best jobs going in your electorate, if you want to be saying that that speech you gave in Parliament about funding new capital works projects in your electorate was wrong, then I encourage you to go and do that, mate, but I don't think your electors will thank you for it.
And
Stephen,
gentlemen, I'm sorry, that's where we'll have to leave it on another note of disagreement. Stephen Jones and Dan Tehan, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Lyndall.
Good to be with you.
And thank you for watching Capitol Hill today.
Business Today.
Hello.